There were 6 of them. Khaki uniforms, tactical vests, helmet cams, moving like they were breaching a terrorist compound, except it wasn't a compound. It was my barn. My goats were watching from the pasture, chewing hay like it was dinner theater. And me? I was on the porch, drinking reheated coffee. Did they just say secure the perimeter? I should have been afraid. Instead, I just raised the mug to my lips and thought. So this is what war over a lawn chair violation looks like. And then, boom, I flipped the floodlight breaker. The entire field lit up like a prison yard. One guy dropped his clipboard. Another screamed when Linda the goat charged his shin. The leader barked something about compliance code red. And I just stood there thinking. This can't be legal. Can it? That's where it peaked. But to understand how a fake HOA turned my hunting lodge into a tactical op, and why I built a drawbridge around my driveway, we need to rewind. Because this didn't start with boots on the ground. It started with a knock on the door, and a clipboard. Before we dive into the madness, smash that like button, subscribe if you believe freedom shouldn't require a permit, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if 6 clipboard commandos showed up at your farm? You ever think you finally made it out? Escaped the noise, the rules, the endless crawl of city rot? That was me. I found a piece of land so deep in the woods it didn't even show up on Google Maps. A 2-hour drive from the nearest traffic light, and exactly what I needed. A hunting lodge tucked in the pines. No neighbors. No rules. Just me, the trees, and a porch with a view that made coffee taste like freedom. I had poured my last savings into it, not because it was flashy, but because it was untouched. Honest land. My land. It had taken me a decade to claw my way to that moment, and I was sure I'd finally earned peace. I was wrong. It was the kind of late afternoon where the sun hangs heavy and golden. I had just settled into my porch chair, warm mug in hand, when I heard tires on gravel. It was so out of place it froze me mid-sip. No one should have been coming up that road. Nobody knew this place even existed outside the deed and a dusty county record. But there she was. A black car, spotless, polished, crested the hill like it was pulling up to a spa, not an off-grid lodge. The driver's door opened, and out stepped the last thing I expected to see in the wilderness, a woman in heels and a fitted blazer, clipboard clutched tight, lips already pressed in judgment. I didn't know her name yet, but I already knew her type. She marched up the porch steps like she'd rehearsed it. Didn't even wait for me to stand. Knocked on the door I had just locked like she paid the mortgage. When I opened it, she didn't introduce herself like a neighbor, didn't offer a smile like a guest. Instead, she shoved a stack of papers into my chest and said, "Hi. I'm Karen. I'm here to collect your back HOA dues." I laughed. Out loud. It wasn't sarcastic, not yet, it was just disbelief. "Hoa?" I said, scanning the forest around us, like maybe a cul-de-sac had sprouted overnight. "This is the middle of nowhere." She tilted her head like a schoolteacher dealing with a particularly stupid student. "It's all in the fine print. You didn't read your contract carefully, did you?" She said it with that smile. You know the one, tight and smug and weaponized. Like she was already imagining the court date, already picturing me folding. $3,000, she added. 30 days to pay. Or we escalate. I blinked. $3,000? I didn't owe anyone anything. The place was purchased legally, fully off the grid. There wasn't a mailbox for miles. The nearest paved road was a suggestion on the map. "You have the wrong person," I said steady. "There's no HOA out here." Karen smiled wider. "There is now." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not annoying wrong. Not paperwork wrong. But trap wrong. You don't just drop a fake HOA in the wilderness unless you're planning something. Something big. Something quiet. She left me standing there, still holding the papers like I might find logic in the margins. As her car disappeared down the trail, the weight of what she just said sank in. She didn't want the money. She wanted in. And she wasn't bluffing. I closed the door. Locked it again. sat down with the documents and flipped through each one. They were fake, mostly, but detailed enough to fool someone not paying attention. And that was the point. They didn't have to be real, just believable enough to wear you down. The worst scams always look like bureaucracy. That night I didn't sleep. I made coffee instead. Pored over property records, land boundaries, the original sale deed. And then I found it, tucked in an overlooked line. Property adjacent to zone parcels may be subject to cooperative land maintenance ordinances if not specifically excluded. Cooperative land maintenance. They had a name for it. A legal ghost clause. And they were using it to bleed landowners dry. The next day, right on cue, another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Karen. It was a man. Older, worn face, construction boots, and a badge clipped to his collar. Not a sheriff's badge. A contractor's ID. He didn't introduce himself at first. Just stepped in like he didn't have time to explain the rules. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "But the HOA? They're not just after dues. They're after your land." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" He closed the door behind him, glanced through the blinds like he expected someone to be watching. And then he told me what I hadn't dared to say out loud. "They're not legit. At least, not in the way you think. They're part of a development push. Investors. Big ones. They buy the land from people who don't realize they're being squeezed. Or they sue them into submission. Either way, you're not the first they've tried this on. And if you don't fight back, you won't be the last." I didn't speak. Not at first. Just stood there as every ounce of peace I had spent a lifetime chasing cracked like frost underfoot. This wasn't going to be a misunderstanding I could clear up with a phone call. This was war. And I was on my own. You know the feeling when something's not just wrong, it's off? That crawling discomfort under your skin, like the land itself is whispering a warning? That was me for the next 48 hours. After the contractor, Tom, left, I sat in silence. I didn't eat. Didn't sleep. I just watched. Every pine needle shift, every bird's cry, every breeze felt like it was carrying a message I couldn't read fast enough. Something was coming, and it wasn't just a fine or another phony letter. I pored over every document Karen had shoved into my hands. Most of it was legal padding, jargon borrowed from real municipal codes but twisted just enough to feel legitimate. Fake by omission. Real enough to intimidate. That's when I found the name. Hardwick. Gregory Hardwick. A developer. I'd seen his name before, buried in local news blurbs about zoning disputes and revitalization projects. It hadn't meant anything then. Now it was like stepping on a landmine made of paper. Because the deeper I dug, the more it was obvious. Hardwick wasn't just involved, he was financing this. And Karen? Karen was just the enforcer. The smiling face of something darker. I needed more. I needed proof. So I started knocking on doors. The few neighbors within shouting distance were either too scared to talk or already resigned to their fate. One guy, older, grizzled, looked at me through the screen door and said, "Don't poke that bear, son. Folks who push back end up buried in fines, or worse." "Worse?" He didn't answer. Just closed the door. But later that night, I got a message. A burner number. No name. Just, "I used to live 2 miles north of you. They took my land last year. I have files. Meet me tomorrow. Early." I didn't sleep. Again. Just sat on the porch, shotgun resting across my lap, watching the tree line like it owed me an explanation. When the sun cracked over the ridge, I was already driving. The guy's name was Reed. Ex-military like me. His land had been swallowed up in what the HOA called conditional annexation. He never sold. Never agreed. But somehow, after months of fines, fabricated code violations, and a court summons for failing to mow a non-existent backyard, he lost everything. "They drained me," Reed said. "Started with letters, then fines, then emergency inspections. They towed my truck for blocking an access path. That access path was a dirt trail I carved with my own boots. The day I left, Karen stood at my mailbox smiling like she just won a raffle. He handed me a flash drive. Inside? Meeting minutes. Emails. Scans of memos signed by Hardwick, addressed to Karen, using phrases like, "Ensure pressure is applied to alpha targets. Non-compliance is a feature, not a bug. Once acquisition reaches critical mass, rezone. Sell high. Payoffs to Councilman Colton are in motion." I felt sick. Cold. Hollow. This wasn't just a scam. This was organized. Funded. Protected. They didn't want my land because it was pretty. They wanted it because it connected two other parcels, and they needed it for the expansion. A luxury retreat, complete with spa, artificial lake, and private airstrip. They were building paradise on the backs of the people they displaced. And I was next. When I got back to the lodge, I found my front door open. Just a crack. Not broken. Not forced. Just ajar. I drew my sidearm and entered slowly. Nothing was missing. But I knew what I was looking for. I went straight to my desk drawer. The folder, my folder, was gone. The one with the original land survey. The one with the notarized sale deed. The one that said this land was mine, fair and square. Gone. They weren't just threatening me now. They were moving. That night I heard movement outside. Footsteps. Not animal. Slow. Deliberate. Human. I killed the lights and watched from the side window. A figure moved between the trees. Flashlight in hand. Not scanning. Not lost. Searching. Then he stopped. Looked up. And smiled. Not at me, at the camera I had mounted in the eaves. He held up a middle finger, turned, and walked into the dark. He wanted me to know he'd been there. Wanted me to feel watched. Hunted. The next morning, I got another call. Same burner number. This time, the voice was younger. Nervous. "Karen's not the top. She's just noise. You want to kill this thing? You need to find the ledger. The real one. Not the fake HOA books. The one Hardwick keeps. It's off-site. I'll text you a location. But be careful. If they know you have it." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time. I hadn't asked for this war. I didn't pick this fight. But I knew one thing now, bone deep. They weren't going to stop until I either gave up the land, or disappeared. And I don't vanish easy. I never fancied myself a spy. I'm not the cloak and dagger type. But desperation does funny things to a person. You stop caring how dangerous something is when the alternative is waking up one morning with nothing left, no land, no house, no name. The voice on the phone had said the ledger was off-site. Said it like I was supposed to know what that meant. I didn't. Not exactly. But I had a lead. One of the emails from the flash drive read gave me mentioned a storage facility 2 towns over. Buried in the middle of legal chatter was this phrase. "Hardwick's Records, Unit 319A. Keep the originals there until the annexation push is finalized. No digital copies." That was it. One line. But enough to go on. The place was called Ridgeview Lock and Store, the kind of place with rusted chain-link gates, faded keypad numbers, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that buzzed like a warning. I drove there just before midnight. I waited an hour. No cameras, no attendants, no patrols. Just stillness. I had a friend, a guy who owed me a favor from a former life. Called him from a burner and asked for a quick job. 10 minutes later, the padlock on 319A clicked open. Inside, nothing but a metal cabinet and a folding table. But when I pried open the cabinet, I felt it. That cold drop in your stomach when the pieces start connecting faster than your brain can process them. Binders. Thick ones? Each labeled with property names. Mine was there. Parcel 61, Target Alpha. I opened it. Every letter Karen had ever sent me, reproduced. aerial photos, topographic maps with elevation notes, a breakdown of my finances, income sources, even flagged medical records I never consented to share. This wasn't just about acquiring my land. It was surveillance, behavioral profiles, psychological manipulation. They had built an entire playbook on how to break me down. And I wasn't the only one. Names filled the ledger, dozens of them. Families. Veterans. Elderly folks living on land passed down 3 generations deep. All targeted for transition. I snapped photos of everything, page by page. But I hadn't even gotten halfway through the next binder when I heard it. Footsteps. Not from outside. From behind me. I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway. Late 30s. Sharp haircut. Neatly pressed jacket with the HOA crest embroidered like it meant something. The kind of guy who still wore cologne in a storage locker. Alex, he said calmly, like we were catching up over coffee. Didn't expect you to be this resourceful. I didn't answer. I didn't move. You know, he said, stepping in and closing the door behind him. Most people fold by now. We find them, wear them down with letters and calls, little visits. They move. They always move. He smiled. Not kind. Not angry. Clinical. But you stayed. You dug. His eyes flicked to the binder in my hand. You shouldn't have found that. Shouldn't have hidden it, I said. He sighed. Took another step closer. You think you understand what this is? You think we're just some corrupt HOA pulling scams? We're cleaning up. We're restoring value to forgotten land. Bringing order. By stealing. By optimizing, he corrected. You know what this land's worth when it's connected to 3 neighboring properties. 8 figures. And it just sits there. With rusted fences and some guy chasing deer. I took a breath. Kept my voice low. You know what this land was worth to me? Everything. For a moment, the smugness slipped. He hesitated. Just for a second. That was enough. I moved. My shoulder hit him hard. Binder to the chest. He stumbled back, hit the wall. I was through the door before he even finished cursing. I sprinted for the truck, tires already turning before the gate even finished opening. Heart jackhammering. Mind spinning. Because now I knew. They weren't bluffing. They were organized. Funded. And they weren't just trying to evict me. They were trying to erase me. When I got back to the lodge, everything was dark. I killed the engine, coasted to a stop. The porch light was out. The trail cams were down. The front door was unlocked. And there, sitting calmly at my kitchen table, sipping from my coffee mug, was Karen. I told you, she said, not looking up, that you didn't read the fine print. I didn't answer. Just closed the door behind me. You've made quite the mess, Alex, she continued. Breaking and entering. Theft of private documents. Defamation. You think anyone's going to believe your little exposé? You broke into my house. No, she said, standing. I executed an HOA safety inspection. You refused to respond to our notices. Get out. You're done here, Alex. You just don't see it yet. She dropped a folder on the counter. Offer. Cash buyout. Above market. You signed this, all goes away. You can find another lodge. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere safer. I looked at the folder. Then at her. And then I said something I knew would change everything. I already made my move, Karen. The press has everything. She froze. What? Ledger's been duplicated. Sent to a reporter. Names, maps, finances. It's over. Her smile cracked. You're bluffing. I stepped forward. Close enough that she could hear every word. Try me. She stood there a beat longer. Then backed up, composed but rattled. This isn't over, she said, voice sharp now. You don't understand who you're up against. No, I said. You don't. And then she left. But something about her calmness, even in retreat, felt wrong. Too smooth. Too prepared. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten to call the cops. She just smiled. And now? Now I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because if I were her, and I had something to lose, I wouldn't walk away. I'd burn everything. You don't sleep after a night like that. Not when someone like Karen sits in your kitchen, sipping your coffee, offering to buy your silence like it's a line item in a spreadsheet. Not when her last words sound less like a threat and more like a prophecy. So I didn't sleep. I waited. I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap, the dawn wind cutting through the trees like a warning. Every creak, every owl call, every rustle of pine needles made me flinch. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was instinct. And around 4 a.m., I saw the first flicker of orange in the trees. At first I thought maybe someone had lit a campfire out on the ridge. But it was too high. Too fast. Fire doesn't climb that quickly unless it's fed. Unless someone wants it to burn. The wind shifted. I caught the smell, gasoline. I was already moving before I realized it. Sprinting toward the back edge of the property, where the pines thickened and the slope dipped just enough to hide someone working in the dark. I didn't need to catch them in the act. I just needed to see enough. And I did. A can. A rag. A figure slipping through the trees. The fire caught dry bark and went up like it had been waiting for the excuse. I grabbed the nearest shovel, ran toward the blaze, started digging fire breaks by instinct. 20 years of muscle memory from backcountry service kicking in. I fought it for hours. And when the volunteers arrived, drawn by the smoke, the radio chatter, the call I finally made when my lungs were coated with ash, they helped finish the job. But the damage had already been done. The cabin was still standing. But just barely. The fire had licked the siding, melted the solar inverter, and blackened the porch like a warning. But the worst part? They knew exactly how far to go. Not far enough to kill me. Not far enough to get federal charges. Just far enough to destroy. Just far enough to say, we can get this close. Next time, we won't miss. I filed the report. Arson, attempted property destruction, suspected political motivation. The local fire chief nodded politely, said the usual words. We'll investigate. We'll follow up. But there was a look in his eye. A quiet kind of defeat. Like he already knew no one was going to touch this. Not when names like Hardwick and Colton and HOA LLCs were involved. Not when the lines between legal pressure and outright threats had blurred to dust. I called Sarah, the hacker who'd helped me crack the ledger. She answered after one ring. They torched it, I said. They tried to burn me out. Silence. Then, they're getting desperate. No, I said. They're getting confident. Because that's what the fire was. A message. A power move. Karen wasn't acting alone. She was backed. Protected. And I had just embarrassed them in the worst way, publicly. They're not going to stop, I said. And I can't protect this place forever. Not alone. Sarah hesitated. Then we hit back. By noon, she'd sent me everything she'd pulled from Hardwick's servers, encrypted documents, backdoor corporate filings, offshore accounts linked to shell LLCs. The HOA wasn't even a real entity. It was a facade, a legal fiction propped up by lawyers and dirtbags with enough money to make it feel real. The names were worse than I imagined. Judges. Planning commissioners. Real estate agents who sold exclusive rural parcels to city investors, then turned around and fined the locals until they moved. But the part that broke me? There was a list. A master list. Target Phase 2. It had addresses, financial profiles, resistance scores. Mine was still labeled Alpha, red underlined, circled. But I wasn't alone. There were others. People like me, off-grid, stubborn, unwilling to play along. Each marked for transition. The only difference? I was the first to push back. Sarah's message pinged in the corner of my screen. We can't stop this alone. Not without help. You need to go public. You need to show them what they're really fighting. She was right. I called Jessica, the reporter who'd been sniffing around the HOA corruption story for months. When I told her what I had, there was a long silence on the line. Then a sharp inhale. Where are you? She asked. By 3 p.m., we were sitting in the back of her car, laptops open, papers scattered across the seats. Jesus, she muttered, scrolling. This is bigger than anything I've seen. This isn't just corruption. This is a coordinated land seizure operation disguised as code enforcement. They're calling it compliance, I said. But it's theft. And fire, she added, glancing at my soot-covered jeans. I didn't smile. Not this time. This isn't a story anymore, I told her. It's a war. That night, Jessica filed the first of her reports. Not a blog post. Not a whisper. A headline. The HOA that burned the woods, inside a rogue operation to seize rural land. Names were named. Quotes from the ledger appeared. Karen. Hardwick. Councilman Colton. Jessica had verified it all. Legal. Bulletproof. We didn't ask for comment. We didn't give them time. And when it went live, I expected rage. Retaliation. A counterattack. But what I got was silence. The kind that says, we're not done yet. 2 nights later, a single piece of paper appeared on my windshield. No envelope. No signature. Just 5 words. You just made it worse. You just made it worse. That's what the note said. No signature, no sender, just 5 words printed in cold block letters, left under my windshield like a parking ticket from hell. I didn't need to guess who sent it. The font might have been anonymous, but the tone was Karen's through and through. And she was right. I had made it worse for her. The article blew up. Jessica's report hit the local airwaves by noon and spread like wildfire. Hundreds of comments. Retweets. National reporters sniffing around. Suddenly, rural HOA corruption wasn't just a conspiracy theory on a message board, it was breaking news. Names were trending. Mine included. But so was Karen's. And Hardwick's. And the name of a city councilman who suddenly announced a temporary leave of absence to spend time with family. They were bleeding in the court of public opinion. But I knew better than to mistake press for protection. People like Karen don't fold when exposed. They escalate. I doubled security on the property. Reinforced locks, new trail cams, battery backups on every system. Sarah rewired the lodge to detect intrusion at every possible angle. But I still felt like I was playing defense on a game board someone else had built. It wasn't enough to protect the lodge. I had to make it clear, this ends now. The last move? I didn't come up with it. Sarah did. She said it over a line so encrypted it could have bounced through the moon. You want them out for good? She asked. You don't just burn the house down. You cut the foundation out from under it. What do you mean? The HOA's only power comes from the belief that they're legitimate. If you destroy the structure from the inside, legally, they lose everything. Permanently. And that's when we found it. A filing error. One line buried in the HOA's own incorporation papers from 10 years ago. The charter hadn't been renewed. It expired 3 years ago. No extension. No vote. No acknowledgement. Every rule they'd enforced since then? Legally unenforceable. Which meant every fine. Every lien. Every notice. Every complaint. Fraud. That was the key. I didn't take it to the sheriff. I took it straight to the state attorney general. It took one meeting. 1 hour of laying out evidence. Sarah's data, the footage, the ledger, the photos from the storage locker, the recordings of Karen threatening me in my own kitchen. The AG's office went quiet for 2 days. Then the subpoenas dropped. Not just for Karen. Not just for Hardwick. But for every member of the HOA executive board. The banks holding the HOA's accounts. the law firm that rubber-stamped their notices, and the developers who had bought up, donated parcels at below market value. They hit them all. RICO statutes. Fraud. Wire tampering. Unlawful property seizure. By the end of the week, Karen was on TV in handcuffs, screaming about deep state land extremists. It was over. Almost. I got one more visitor. Not press. Not a deputy. It was Tom, the contractor who first warned me, weeks ago. He stood on the porch with a cardboard box in his hands. Inside were printed copies of every violation Karen ever filed against this region. Not just mine. Dozens of people. Maybe more. You gonna burn these? He asked. I looked down at the stack. The fake fines. The threats. The lies. All of it printed on clean paper like it meant something. No, I said. I grabbed a hammer and started building something else. A sign. Heavy pine wood. Big enough to see from the road. I staked it at the edge of my property, right where the gravel begins and the trees stretch tall. It reads, Private land. No HOA. We don't do compliance here. We do truth. Some of the neighbors came back. Quietly. One by one. A few stopped by with pie. Others just nodded from their driveways. Turns out most of them weren't siding with Karen. They were just afraid. Now they weren't. Now they knew they weren't alone. I still don't sleep through the night. Sometimes I hear things, tires on gravel, voices in the trees that vanish with the wind. But I don't flinch anymore. Because I know this place won't fall again. Not on my watch. Not to clipboards. Not to signatures. And sure as hell not to people who mistake power for permission. They thought this land was vulnerable because it was quiet. They forgot one thing. Quiet doesn't mean weak. His started with a clipboard. It ended with handcuffs. If you've been with me on this ride, hit that like button, drop a comment, and share it. Because the truth doesn't go quietly.